Okay, I'm going to give this my 100% try, but I'm going to go through this quickly, so please feel free to hit stop at any time. But this is our once over, kind of in depth mini lecture on biomolecules. At this point, you've gone through a POGL that had two different models on biomolecules. We went through an Amoeba Sisters video. We've made models. You looked in your textbook, electronically posted in Google Classroom, but pulled out textbook information so that by the time you get to this PowerPoint, you should be fairly familiar with our four biomolecules, our carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. It's important that you understand they're in the food that you eat. They are in all organisms. And you eat these things so that you can get the molecules needed to produce energy. But you also eat these things to get the molecules you need for biosynthesis. Bio means life, and synthesis means making. So for all of the new cells, your growth, your tissue, your repair, your replacement parts, when you scrape your knee or you cough out your left lung, you need new tissue cells, and you get them from eating a variety of foods so that you can get all the little monomers you need to build the big organic biomolecules. You can see 3 of these 4 in most of your food labels, but they're all required for life. They have some things in common. They're called polymers, which means that they're made of many subunits. Each single unit is called a monomer. So one brick right here is just a monomer. This chain of monomers we call a backbone. They have lots and lots of carbon, and so they have lots of carbon-carbon and carbon-hydrogen bonds, which are very high energy. They're considered organic because they're required for life. Inorganic substances don't have much carbon or hydrogen or other sponge, but our biomolecules certainly do. So again, a polymer is like a brick wall, and a monomer is just one brick. So if you pull those in, you need to be able to tell me that carbohydrates are made of lots and lots of monosaccharides, lipids are made of lots of fatty acids and glycerols, or fatty acids and phosphate groups. Proteins are made out of amino acids, and nucleic acids are made out of nucleotides. Other things that they have in common, they all have a tremendous amount of carbon, and that's because carbon is a very flexible, abundant molecule. Abundant means it's easy to be found. We can find it in our gaseous atmosphere, in our solids, and dissolved in our waters around the planet. Carbon forms strong bonds, 4 of them. That's because it's got the 4 valence electrons. It can make linear molecules or ring molecules, and it can bond with virtually any. You can make a single bond, a double bond, or a triple bond, and we're not going to watch this at this time. You can if you so choose. So let's start talking about carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are short-term energy storage molecules. However, they do also have some structural uses. So it's not just an energy molecule. It actually can be really, really great for support structures, and I'll show you some. So plants make glucose. That's the product of photosynthesis. That's what plants will use to get their energy from. And animals are going to eat their food, and they're going to produce glycogen. Glycogen is a whole bunch of little small glucoses all bound together in a long chain and stored. Both of these are polysaccharides, and starch, which is thousands and thousands and thousands of glucose molecules, are made out of the monomer glucose, just like glycogen made out of the monomer glucose. They're just bonded differently. Now, how about some of those carbohydrates that are actually structures? Plants don't have bones, right? So how do plants keep their beautiful shape? How is it that you're not able to push over a tree? It's because of all the cell wall and cellulose that's in that plant. Around every cell, there is a multi-layered set of ropes or fibers that are tangled around the cell, and that's called a cell wall. They are made out of thousands and thousands of glucose molecules. We can't digest them. There's some very interesting bacteria that can, but we can't use them as an energy molecule. So when someone says, eat your salad, they're doing that because they want you to get the fiber that can clean up your intestinal tract. Some arthropods, like this crab here or lobster, has got a hard outside shell made out of chitin. Chitin is another polymer that it looks like it's made out of a whole bunch of glucoses, but those are a little bit different. But those are that hard shell, not a fuel source, not an energy source. You can recognize carbohydrates because they are made out of C's, H's, and O's. And the HO is very often a 2-to-1 ratio. So if you look at glucose, C6, H12, O6, you've got, for every one oxygen, you've got 2 hydrogens. What about this one? Is C12, H22, O11 a carbohydrate? It looks pretty close, 2-to-1 ratio. But if you take a look at that carbon, it should probably be the same amount as that oxygen. I won't ask you for that level of detail on any tests, but you should definitely know that carbohydrates are made out of C's, H's, and O's. And typically, there's a CHO ratio of 1 to 2-to-1. All right, let's talk about lipids. Lipids, saturated fats are butter and cream. They're made by animals, and they have these long fatty acid chains that are completely saturated. There's no double bonds there. So they pack up really tight, and they can stay solid at room temperature. If you look down here, this is a plant oil or a plant fat, and that one's got a bend. It's got a double bond in there. That means it's unsaturated. That means it's liquid at room temperature. So vegetable oil and canola oil are all different types of plant oil, olive oil. These are plant oils, and they are made of long fatty acid chains that have double bonds in them. This killer whale has got a big, thick layer of blubber, and that is made out of animal fat, and it is there to insulate this killer whale from the cold temperatures and keeping heat from escaping from its insides and and radiated out into the cold water. If you think of a camel, camel's doing the opposite. Camel's got those big fat lumps, big giant lumps or humps made out of fat, and that's to protect it from the sun that's beating down on its backside. Plants are covered in wax also to keep them from dehydrating. Look at how beautiful and shiny that plant is. And the number one lipid in the universe so far, in our world, is going to be a membrane. This could be a cell membrane or a membrane around a chloroplast or a nucleus, but membranes are made out of phospholipids. It's a bilayer, 2 layers. The fatty acids hate water, so they line up together to keep water from going into the membrane. Water can slip through, just like oxygen and carbon dioxide can, but it's not going to get stuck in the middle. These heads are hydrophilic heads. Those are phosphate groups, and they're on the inside and the outside of this membrane. Lipids are also, excuse me, a long-term energy. They're long, whereas carbohydrates are short-term energy. Lipids stick around for a long time, and they are a fuel molecule, but they also are protection from internal structures. We've got padding around our hearts and padding around our spine and our internal organs so they don't bonk into each other and do damage. They can insulate you from temperature, highs and lows. They prevent organisms from losing water or dehydrating, and they form the major part of all membranes. Lipids also have a CHO, C's, H's, and O's, but they don't have as many oxygens. They have a much, much smaller number of oxygens. So typically you won't see a 2-to-1 ratio of hydrogens to oxygens. Some more lipids, fatty acids, fats, oils, waxes, and steroids are examples of that. And here is one of the lipids that you made in your notebook. You made a triglyceride earlier this week. And so this has 3 fatty acids hooked onto a glycerol right here. Right here in the pink zone, that's where the water molecule came out, so these fatty acids could attach. Let's talk about proteins. Proteins are amazing molecules, so specific, so important. Their shape is very, very important to their job. And so we've got, typically we think of proteins are dietary muscle builders, but you can find protein in all living things. But legumes and meat are very common. Dairy products, very common to have high proteins. Proteins are also these little antibodies that this is actually attaching to an antigen on a virus. So this is very specific. Your body made this to attach and to tell the rest of your immune system, hey, let's kill this thing. And they memorize it. Proteins are also embedded in the membranes of our cells and our organelles, and sometimes they pump molecules in and out. Sometimes they're just used to transport things, like a tunnel, just give them an opportunity. But they're very interesting and integral part of a cell membrane. Oxytocin is we call Cupid's protein. It's the one of the happy chemicals, and then hemoglobin is the reason we have red blood cells is to carry oxygen around. And so hemoglobin is like a little protein. Well, it's a big protein actually, but it's a nest and it carries oxygen in your red blood cells. And the last one, and probably the most important, because we're going to do a lab about this on Wednesday and Thursday, are enzymes. Enzymes are these little amazing machines. They're the light blue here in this picture that will take in very specific things and break them up, or they can take in very specific things and bind them together. But enzymes are helper molecules. They allow chemical reactions to happen fast enough to keep up with all of life's requirements. With no enzymes, we would not have evolved into the most sophisticated set of organisms that we are today and have been in the past. So again, proteins. Some proteins are actual physical structures, like a hemoglobin molecule or an antibody, and other proteins are communicators. They're structures that tell other parts of our bodies to do something. So we could say the function of proteins is to carry out all messages from the DNA and to control metabolism, digestion, and your heredity. Recognize your proteins by their amino acids. Amino acids have got an amino group, this nitrogen and hydrogen group. They've got a carboxyl group, which is the COOH, and they've got an R group. There's 20 different R groups, so that means that there's 20 different amino acids. Amylase, keratin, albumin, collagen, hemoglobin, antibodies, hormones like insulin, oxytocin, and somatotropin, as well as catalase, are all very common proteins that we will study in this class. And the last thing that I wanted to tell you about proteins is that, and I mentioned this before, their shape is incredibly important. So look at collagen. Collagen is a twist. If you grabbed this at the top and the bottom, you know that if you pulled it, it would stretch a little bit. Well, collagen is actually what stretches your skin, what allows your skin to be a bit stretchy. So if you put your hand out and you pinch the skin on the back of your hand and let go, your skin's going to go back to normal pretty quick. As you get older, your collagen depletes. So when you pinch the skin on the back of my 52-year-old hand, the skin doesn't go back as fast. That's why us mature people have more wrinkles than you youngsters. The other one that I'd like you to look at is this hemoglobin molecule. Again, this is what carries oxygen in your red blood cells. And if you look, you can see these little, excuse me, these little iron groupings, and this is where the oxygen will attach. It's 4 different chains, all wrapped up like nests, carrying oxygen in your red blood cells. All right, another protein is an antibody. This one I already mentioned. We've got a really great scanning electron micrograph remodel or model of an antibody right here. These are immune system structures that your B cells make so they can defend yourself from immune system attacks. And then again, examples of proteins, enzymes, so important. And I really like this graphic over here. If you take a look at this graphic, if you have a chemical reaction, it usually takes quite a bit of energy to get it started. So using an enzyme, it's kind of like pouring lighter fluid on a campfire. It helps everything start and react much, much easier. So with no enzyme, you got to put in a lot of energy to get the same reaction. If you have an enzyme, you don't have to put much energy in at all to get that to go. Recognition of nucleic acids. These are DNA, RNA, and ATP, and we're looking for nucleotides. There's a phosphate group, a sugar ring, and a nitrogen base. You can see those things in this image right here. There's a phosphate, a sugar ring, and a nitrogen base. Sometimes it's a single ring, sometimes it's a double ring. DNA, RNA, and ATP are your three examples. And there's a whole ton of vocabulary for you. Please make certain that you add the information that you just got from this PowerPoint into your notebooks on page 23, 25, 27, and 29.